This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 31st, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the impact of the criteria for awarding federal funding on research excellence in Canada.
Mr. Horstman, we've been talking about group conformity and how that might diminish the quality of research, and I get that EDI may contribute to reinforcing that conformity. But if we abolish EDI from the award criteria, do you think that would solve the problem, though?
I don't think it would solve the problem. I don't think that that removing that criteria would all of a sudden open up a lot of topics for exploration. It may, around the margins, improve things a little bit. You might, for example, see a little slightly more improved environments for research without some of these EDI, I guess, bureaucracies. But I think really the problem is that you don't have a diversity of different opinions and viewpoints present in the university and in the broader research ecosystem. So I don't think that that it's really the end all. One thing that I think we should consider is sort of this endless expansion of more and more grants, types of oversight bodies, more funding bodies. I think we have to ask, is government-funded research always going to lead to improved economic growth? And I don't think there are convincing arguments. I think mostly private sector research drives economic growth. I'm not saying we should have no public funding, but I think we need to have that conversation about what is the appropriate amount. And I think removing EDI certainly is one first step.
Some are arguing that government should fund exploratory research, and that might mean a few strange ideas come out. And we've highlighted at the committee there's some crazy things that taxpayers have funded, unfortunately, to be studied. But what's the harm in that? Don't we want lots of diversity to be a part of a vibrant research culture in an open society?
Yes, we do, certainly. I think there's nothing wrong with having a lot of different ideas. I think it's important that we are open to all sorts of different ideas. There are a couple of problems, however, is that there are essentially two different worldviews at play in the university now. And I think what we have to recognize is that many of these ideas, as some of the examples I showed, are part of a strain of thought called critical social justice. And I think they are not playing by the liberal science rules that we're accustomed to. So in our liberal society, we tend to have a liberal economic system, right, of free markets, a democratic system. But the writer Jonathan Rauch coined the term liberal science. And liberal science is any knowledge production system, be you a scientist, journalist. To generate robust knowledge, there are really only two rules. So the first rule is that knowledge is provisional. No one has the final say, right? So anything could be questioned. So if you look at, for example, the history of estimates of the size of the universe, right? It changes constantly. And that's because no one said, okay, we're done, it's over. Because what you notice now, it's becoming more fashionable in the academy to say, okay, this is beyond debate, or the science is settled. Okay, so it's becoming fashionable to actually break Rauch's first rule. Okay, the second rule is this. The second rule is no one has personal authority. No individual or group gets to decide, I know the truth, and it's just me, right? You have to have it open to anyone. So I tell my students, for example, if you do an experiment well and describe it properly, it should be replicable by someone on another continent of another culture centuries into the future. Okay, it's universal. And that rule is being broken through assertions that there's a certain ethnic knowledge or ways of knowing or lived experience, right? So I think These are problems that are ascendant in the academy. They have to be recognized, and I believe have to be confronted head-on.
Besides EDI, are there any other award criteria that you think might have a negative impact on research excellence?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Besides EDI, are there any other ways that they kind of put the thumb on the scale that you think that might have negative impact on research excellence?
I think there are a few issues. So, for example, some of the merit indicators for the Discovery Grant, for example, which is one I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. If you look at some of the merit indicators for the proposal, they'll include things like socioeconomic and environmental impacts. Well, that's open to interpretation, right? So you can imagine if you're a progressive, you might say, well, a proposal that seeks to reduce emissions would be beneficial impacts. Whereas someone else, perhaps a more conservative person, might say, well, something that's better that if it expands oil and gas production and leads to economic growth, right? So there's no agreed upon definition of what that is. It's really open to a value judgment. And I think, again, because many academics tend to be much more progressive, you tend to prioritize certain types of research over others.
Thank you again for your work that you do at the universities. We're out of time, but I encourage you to write any additional briefs on different questions that get asked today. It is helpful for the report writing that comes here shortly. Thank you.
So thank you. So now we'll turn to MP Longfield.
In terms of the scientific principles, is you have to identify biases and you have to do your best to check biases. And part of the peer review process is to have other sets of eyes to try and eliminate biases, which is also the goal of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I don't see this as a political thing. I think this is a scientific approach that should be embraced. Would you agree with that?
Indeed, I would. And I would think that just like we've identified that there can be risks of certain types of conflicts of interest, we've put in safeguards to really make sure that those are presented and put forward. Sometimes that may mean that the reviewer will excuse himself or herself. And so the same with being aware of other types of biases that may not come from the conflict of interest, we may say, in terms of economic, financial considerations, but other types of considerations also can factor in. And
maybe you can elaborate on that with another questioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to direct my questions to Mr. Jeff Horseman, PhD, Professor of Chemistry and Biochemistry at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thank you, sir, for being here. I see that you've written an op-ed recently. I haven't had a chance to read it about, and it was titled, "How much confidence can we have in a research ecosystem that incentivizes betraying its oneself?" And that, I would just like, if you could expand on that. It caught my attention just recently, and I was wondering if you could expand on that. Is this connected to declining trust in institutions that we're seeing, or are you talking about something else?
Yes, I think you're referring to an op-ed where I think that's a quote from an op-ed that I published in the Toronto Sun in February. And that was titled, "Scientists and Engineers to the Public Save Us from Ourselves." It was really a plea to have some sort of intervention, perhaps, in trying to remove these EDI directives. And in that particular one, I cited examples of open racial discrimination in hiring faculty, right, where you have hiring 6 Black and 6 Indigenous faculty, and it involved discrimination against those two groups, right? And I just don't think that, while I agree people are well-intentioned, I think what happens is you end up, institutionalizing racial discrimination. And I don't think that this instantiating this type of sectarianism in a university or society is healthy.
Has DEI has it had any impact on the pursuit of excellence? Can you say one way or the other? Like, presumably, I just looked up the SHRC DEI web page, and it's several pages of it. Presumably, their recommendation around DEI is that it will make our research better. Has there been any evidence for or against that argument?
I don't know. Well, it depends how you'd measure it. So I guess how you would measure improved excellence, the devil's in the details here, right? So are you going to get more publications, more higher impact publications? I don't know. So I would say, just from a logical argument, if your hiring initiatives exclude most of the population, then it just seems statistically, just mathematically, you are not going to be hiring the best, right? Now, the counter argument would be that somehow in the normal hiring process, certain ethnicities are excluded through some vague mechanisms that are never clearly articulated. So I just think, on a logical point, I don't understand how it can improve excellence.
Now, we've heard a number of times around an acronym, DORA, I think that's an acronym, and then this San Francisco policy. Could you recommend those things, and can you maybe just explain them a little bit?
I think probably Ms. Morin would be better placed to. I'm aware of them, but
Okay.
I'm not very.
You're not
well
endorsing
versed in
either of
those.
them?
No.
Okay. Ms. Morin, could you maybe clarify for me a little bit what these acronyms or policies are?
So it is often referred to as DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment.
So they're the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
That is the same document.
And would you be recommending that as a policy to be pursued by universities across the country?
A number of universities have signed on, and as have the federal funding agencies.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Horstman, you seem to be you are recommending that abolishing EDI from the tri-council agencies. What would you suggest? Do we need to replace those with something else, or can we just get rid of that entirely? And would the process then be equitable and fair, in your opinion?
Yes, I think you should just replace them. I don't
Replace them.
I mean, sorry, abolish them.
Abolish them. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what you would replace it with. I think if you just have, the simple merit, whatever that is, publications, the merit of the research, I think that is all you need. I don't know why you have to complicate it.
Okay. What is your perception of the public's concerns or perceptions of these kinds of criteria, these DI criteria?
Well, you had Professor Kaufman here last week, I believe, and he pointed out, for example, that by 70-30, I think the public is really against. They don't like colorblind, or they prefer colorblind approaches to issues like this. So, taking into
Sorry,
account.
that's a half a minute over our time.
Okay.
Thank you.